Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about a premium tier list after the ban list that got released a couple weeks ago. This is the second video of the three, the last one being standard, which is coming up very soon. So this will essentially be my opinions on what the best decks are in premium at the moment, obviously after the ban list is in effect, so probably for the second half of the Bushiroad Springfest. If you guys need any coaching for the BSF or BRO season, feel free to hit me up on Metafy. My link is in the bottom right hand corner. Feel free to book a session and we can get started. So this is something we're gonna do. We're gonna kind of depict the story from what essentially got banned and how that kind of morphs into everything else. So I'll start with the big one, which is Gear Chronicle. So Gear Chronicle getting their Inglisa banned, previously got the Colossus banned as well. And yeah, the story becomes, where does Gear Chronicle kind of sit? And I think, personally, Gear Chronicle is an A tier deck. It's not as boogeyman as it was before. Obviously, you know, having Inglisa as a Steam Maiden card allowed you to re-ride down with soul blasting effects such as Enterana, and anything else that essentially soul blasts, right? The difference is now you have to use a different grade 3 that serves the same purpose, which the only other grade 3 in the format at the moment is Chronojet. The problem with that is that your cats, your Enterana, and anything that searches Steam Maiden specific cards, right, means you can't search your grade 3. So that means that naturally you have to start drawing into your grade 3s to get what you want, which may mean that you include Gear Dogs, you include Steam Breath Dragons, you include ways to be able to search for your grade 3, which may or may not impact the consistency of the deck. Whereas now, you know, you ride Inglisa, you ride down, the Inglisa is searchable, and yeah, you know, that's pretty much the end of the story, right? But now you have to actually work for your grade 3, so the consistency of the deck drops a bit, right? Which is fine. Like that's what you want. You don't want to kill a deck. It still has its mechanics, and I think overall Gear Chronicle is still in a good place, just not as broken as it was before. The other deck that got banned was Great Nature, and to be honest, I actually think the ban on Spangled is not only for the new Premium Collection Stride and its Overtrigger component, but it's also future-proofing. And I think Bushiroad knows more than what we do from the outside picture, and they know what's coming out in the history collection. So I think this is future-proofing for essentially that. But the weird thing is that they're banning it now when they have another ban list in June. So I'm guessing the ban was primarily for the stride play, so that you put the Overtrigger and essentially hit it, and, you know, stack your deck and whatever. So I think it's a precaution in a way, but I think Great Nature is just so disregarded in the meta. It's so weak in the meta at the moment that I don't actually think that matters. But, you know, you gotta limit the decks that you need to limit, and, you know, sometimes these unfair mechanics may just win, you know, games randomly, and, you know, health of the format is also one of the things there. But to be honest, in my opinion, I think this is more catered for the second upcoming ban list that is in June. I think this is where the purpose of this restriction is more impactful, and we saw in JP got full Bronto hit, and that kind of makes sense. You know, you have your Dragonic Vanquisher, you're going to go into your history collection stride, and then get your 2 markers, and then rewrite into full Bronto for a 3rd marker, and then yeah, it gets really ridiculous, right? So 3 XLs, yeah, kind of crazy. But yeah, like I said, I think the Great Nature hit is more for the second ban list hit, which is in June. But yeah, I guess the impact of it now is for that Overtrigger play. But to be honest, I think Great Nature is in a very rough spot at the moment. But not to say it's not a bad deck. I think it's just, you know, I think Solemn created some sort of deck list before where it catered for the Narukami meta, but I think Great Nature is just a little bit slow, but I think it's still a pretty formidable deck. You know, if for some reason it somehow gets going, then yeah, you know, a little bit in trouble. Now, looking at some of the other decks in the format at the moment, Dark Irregulars. I think Dark Irregulars is going to be one of the best decks in the format, and this is not Copium. I think a lot of people are like, you know, Derek, Dark Irregulars sucks. I can't draw NOK. I can't do this. I can't do this. Well, draw your NOK and just do it. All right. I've been drawing NOKs since 2019, 2018 even. And, you know, the deck hasn't changed, right? What has changed is the ban list. The ban list has changed so that now an aggressive Gear Chronicle can't roll you out of the game, right? Another one that got banned was Bermuda Triangle. But Bermuda Triangle only lost Kutia, right? Losing Kutia, you still have, you know, everything else the Highlander package has, right? If you look at Solemn's list for Worlds, he made that for a ride down meta, and everything that is in that meta stays as it is, probably other than Gear Chronicle, right? You still have your Spike Brothers, you still have, you know, Narakami, you still have all these good decks, right? And any deck that can ride down is still going to, you know, capitalize on what the format is at the moment. Bermuda Triangle, the only problem now is that you lose a card that buffs the consistency of this ride down. Now you have to manually draw your Yuikas. Now you have to manually draw your Justines. And now you have to probably include more Soul Blasting units to perform the ride down play, right? So you're losing a card that essentially makes the deck unfair, right? But the deck is good. It still does what it does. It still rides down. It still has a ride into Anj to essentially make your hand 15. It's ridiculous, right? The deck doesn't change. What changes is that you lose a card that essentially fetches any card in the deck, right? Now you have to draw it. Now you have to search for it. Now you have to play Serias. Now you have to, you know, play a little bit more than just grab the card itself. It's still a good deck, right? And why is this so impactful for Dark Irregulars' success is that now decks are toned down. And I think that's a real big key point is that Dark Irregulars couldn't get set up because all of these decks just absolutely destroy, you know, Dark Irregulars in the face just by throwing down cards and just smacking them in the face, right? Now Dark Irregulars has I guess a gap to breathe in, and that might just be enough to, you know, get this deck back in the metagame. Maybe I don't put it in S. Maybe I put it in like high A or low S, but I wouldn't put it at the top. I still think Bermuda Triangle is, you know, capable of being the best deck at the moment. But to be honest, if with Inglisa banned, I still think Gear Chronicle is, you know, very close to being, you know, probably an S tier deck, low S, high A. You know, if you're Dave Vecht out there, you're probably, you know, cooking up some list, and I bet you it will find success. All right, because I know Dave is an incredible player, incredible GC, you know, specialist, so to say, and you know this guy is going to be cooking up lists, right? Same with Eric, Vanguard Insider, he's, you know, cooking up lists, and these guys will find success, right? So yeah, this is, I think, where Dark Irregulars will be. Let's put it in A for now. I don't see any deck being, you know, too crazy. I think maybe how to see is S is a deck you have to consider bringing into your team lineup for BSF, and then, you know, everything else kind of comes under that. Aquaforce. Aquaforce is one of those other decks that you put in A. I think it's a very strong deck. The deck didn't change, and, you know, it even gets better with the consistency buff in the V promo. The card is just, well, the deck is just good, right? Just draws a bunch, can have ride down plays, still does what it does, has more stoic care mechanics now. Yeah, the deck is very formidable. I think it's a very solid deck to bring at the moment in the metagame. Something like a Grand Blue, I think Grand Blue is another solid deck, solid pick. Now that everything has toned down a bit, Grand Blue has a place to kind of sit there and, you know, play with the pace of every other deck as well. One of the things that Grand Blue couldn't do before was that, you know, these decks are just so aggressive, you know, just slams you in the face, you really can't do anything, and that's that. Gold Paladin, I'm not sure where I put Gold Paladin. I think Gold Paladin is just a good deck. You know, you still have your Ezel shenanigans, you can still play Gurguit, Ultima is still a thing, or multiple XLs. I think the deck hasn't really changed, and I think it's just good. Genesis, I think Genesis is a very formidable deck. One of the, decks that kind of stayed in the previous format, and now that everything just kind of toned down a bit, Genesis can finally find a spot in the metagame at the moment. I think it's a very, very strong deck, and something that you definitely have to test against and test for. Narukami, surprisingly, sits in A. I think Narukami, we saw lists of sweep command, obviously, with the hit to stun verse being at 1, it just means that you play a little bit differently, you play very sweep oriented. There are some new cards that make, Narukami a little bit better, and yeah, I think it's still a formidable deck. It still does what it does, and it still has battle phase disruptions in the Bulwark, Impede. Some decks even run Unruly, and this deck is still there. It's still there. Kagero. So Kagero has Lawkeeper, it has Overlord, but the deck itself is just not there. It's missing so many things, like a consistent draw engine. There are decks like Lawkeeper that have popped up recently, but I think the deck itself needs a lot of work. It needs someone or something to probably, bump up the deck a bit, someone who specializes in the deck to kind of, bring it to fruition. But at the moment, I don't think it is that great of a deck. Some could argue you could probably put it at the low of B, but I think putting it in C can kind of set a definitive line of where Kagero is. Link Joker. So I think Link Joker is a pretty formidable deck. The deck itself in deleters is a glass cannon. I think if you do not prepare for deleters, you might be able to, snag some free wins with Link Joker and absolutely destroy people out of the game. And there is nothing your opponent can do about it. If Link Joker gets the stride, which now it can, because all these aggressive decks are now slowing down, and these decks are toning down a bit, it gives a bit of breathing room for Link Joker to essentially get to that stride turn and then capitalize on that as well. DP, as it is, DP, it's tanky as the game progresses. It still has its one-shot mechanics with Rinka and Unibird. The deck hasn't changed. I think it is a very nice spot for it at the moment in A. As you can see, there's a lot of A decks, so towards the end, maybe we'll start shifting a few things up and down. But yeah, Mega Colony. So this is the big question. Where does Mega Colony sit at the moment? With the hit to Bermuda, I think a lot of people are looking at ways to not play Bermuda and play something else. And if they're playing something else, they're probably going to play something like Gears or Grand Blue, or maybe Dark Irregulars, or something that doesn't call from hand. And I think that's where Mega Colony capitalizes, because now you can just spam Gridora. You have your new stride that negs 10k and retires a countercharge or whatever it's called. So the deck itself kind of kept up with Highlander. Yes, not really. I think I versed Peter playing Mega Colony at Worlds, and the deck is good, but I think at that point Highlander was just so strong. Like, it had everything going for it, and yeah, Helltrotter is just ridiculous. Had ways to return cards to deck. So Mega Colony itself is a formidable deck. It's a stable deck, and can actually play into an anti-meta game against the likes of Dark Irregulars, Gear Chronicle, anything that calls or superior calls, right? But I think if you're looking at the top parts of A, right, you're looking at Genesis, you're looking at Aquaforce, you're looking at Bermuda Triangle, Narukami, these decks call from hand. They don't care about, you locking them out of, superior calling, whatever. They have ways to find multiple grade 3s. Bermuda has a bajillion grade 3s. Grand Blue can salvage, but the only problem with Grand Blue is that you can't call from drop zone, and that just stops the whole deck. But like Aquaforce, it draws a bunch, you know, you're still gonna get your grade 3, you even get your grade 4, right? Your Lambros, your Magnolia Elders, still good. Genesis can, you know, just draw a bunch, you know, you're drive checking 7 times, you're drawing a bunch of cards, you hit your OT, you're drive checking more, and pretty much you just have all these cards in hand, right? So I think Mega Colony is in a nice spot. It's good against some decks. It's not good against some other decks, but you know, that's the nature of the game. And I think it's a very nice way to represent Mega Colony at the moment in the current metagame. I think it's a A tier deck, but I wouldn't put it towards the top because there are some decks at the top that will, you know, it will have a hard time against. Like I said, against like Aquaforce, Bermuda, Genesis, it will have a hard time, right? So let's put it there. Murakumo, Shiryuki, solid deck. But I think itself, because of these aggro decks, Murakumo, Shiryuki will get outrushed. There were times where in the previous season, all I needed to do was just play 3 lanes and aggro early against Murakumo and it would fall apart. The times where I ride down, you know, they try to like, you know, sustain that ride down play as well. Try to capitalize on that, ride into Shiryuki, neg 50 million to your Vanguard, and then try to kill you that way. That concept is still there. But in a normal world where, you know, these players are playing against, like, let's just say, super ride down decks, the likes of Bermuda, the likes of Aquaforce, you know, Murakumo can't actually deal too well against, you know, rush and super aggro, right? The likes of Spike Brothers as well, right? Spike Brothers will just aggro you out of existence, right? And Murakumo just can't do that. And the problem at the moment is that Murakumo needs to get to his second stride to capitalize on essentially a full win turn, right? You know, you go into your Shibaraku Victor and then you're looping your Victors and yeah, you just call it a game, pretty much neg 40k to your opponent. And that's pretty much game. Unless you hit your OT, then it's pretty much game, right? But the problem is everything before that. And if you're versing the likes of Spike Brothers, the likes of Aquaforce, Bermuda, it's gonna aggro you out and you're gonna just, yeah, get absolutely destroyed, right? So yeah, I think Murakumo is a nice deck. It probably is at the low of A, but I think at the moment we have so many decks in A that I kind of need to push stuff down. So I'll start by pushing Murakumo down to B, but not to say that it is not an A tier deck. I think it is a solid pick. And you know, some people might not know how to play against it and then just get caught with that too. Neonectar. Well, we have Green Katrina back. And you know what my thoughts on it are? I think it is a B tier deck. Now there's a lot of people out there that are like, Derek, you're coping. Like, why is this a B tier deck, right? Back 3-4 years ago, when, you know, Neonectar got Ines and Green Katrina got banned, right? That was when the meta was so impactful for Neonectar that, you know, Ines with Katrina is game breaking because of the power levels. Some decks in the format didn't have ways around it, right? But 4 years went past. 4 years worth of product came out and look at all these decks now, right? Actually probably half of these decks didn't even exist like back then. Back in the Ezel, DI, Neonectar meta, Green Katrina is back and it is great. You know, it's bringing Neonectar back into the format, but I don't think it is that impactful like it was before, right? You know, you still have your tokens rush and whatever, and you know, there are some spicy builds out there that I know, but if you're versing a smart player and they know what they're up against, they know immediately how to counter this, and especially those who, you know, test the living crap out of Premium, you know, they know the ins and outs of Neonectar and even these spicy builds, and yeah, that's just it. Like, Neonectar can't recover, right? It's a fair deck. I think it's a very formidable deck, and I don't want to put it in A because it is on the likes of Murakumo. It's a very solid deck. You know, it does what it does, and to be honest, you know, you'd be happy that Neonectar is back with Green Katrina, but just to mention that S, A, and B are very close to each other. Very marginal differences between S and A to B, but there's a clear difference between an S tier deck and a B tier deck, right? So maybe I can put like DP down here as well. You know, it's solid deck, but it can get rushed out. Spike Brothers stays there. I think Spike Brothers is a very, very strong deck. Didn't change. Rising Greed On is still a thing. And yeah, it just rides up, cripples your opponent, and then capitalizes on the galley stride turn. OTT. OTT is one of those decks that, you know, solid deck, has a game plan in Battle Sisters, still has its own strides and whatnot. You have the Dragon King, you have Ichikishima, probably the stride that carries the deck. Still have Popos. Popo with the Ichikishima has an unguardable attack, and you know, as you dig through your deck, you will get there. So I think it's just a solid deck, nothing too game breaking, especially against, you know, each of these other decks that probably has a better stand in the meta at the moment. Nubatama. Nubatama had what? Daihozan, Shunui. Just okay. I think it's a okay deck. Probably nothing in comparison to like all these other ones in S to B tier. I think Nubatama needs a little bit of work. I guess Hanzo Mizukaze is pretty good. So maybe I put like B, low B. Hanzo Mizukaze is pretty scary, you know, 6 attacks and you can only guard 4 of them. And yeah, it's not very fun. Mizukaze is a pretty unfair card, but yeah. I think Nubatama is sitting in a nice place. But yeah, as you can see, you know, there's a lot of formidable decks at the moment in Premium. Probably one of the best formats to play at the moment. Tachikaze, I think Tachi's goes in B, but high B. High B, low A. The, you know, specialist for this card dweeb, anyone who specializes in Tachikaze will probably be like, you know, this deck deserves a lot of light into A tier, and yes, it probably does, right? These guys know what they're talking about, and these guys will bring this deck and play it at a high level. But you know, if I had to pick up a deck randomly without knowing how to learn it and, you know, have the deck carry me through a tournament, Tachikaze is probably not going to do that, right? That's probably a representation that, you know, when you're looking at these tier lists, you're probably like, okay, if I pick up a deck, will it carry me through a tournament? And S tier, probably yes. A tier, probably yes. B, probably not, right? These decks in B, you kind of need to invest a little bit of time to get, you know, used to it, and then find the little intricate bits, and then that's how you differentiate from, you know, being a B tier deck to an A tier deck. So yeah, I think Tachikaze, in the right hands, it's going to do a lot of damage. Nova Grapplers. I think Nova Grapplers needs some help, but once it gets its new VPR, I think it's going to wreck a lot of havoc. A lot of these decks, you know, are no longer aggroed by the likes of Gear Chronicle and Bermuda. So yeah, I think Nova Grapplers needs a little bit of work. Royal Paladin. I think Jewel Knights is good. I think Jewel Knights is one of those decks that is formidable, you know. Obviously nothing in comparison to S and A. It's just a really good deck. Still need to test for it. Has Crystal Luster and yeah, a restanding Salome. Yeah, pretty scary. Angel Feathers. I think Angel Feathers need a lot of work. I think the deck itself, yeah, there's no place for it in Premium at the moment. I wish somebody out there, you know, can whip up a spicier list for Angel Feathers. We did see No CL, but I think the ride down with No CL is just not as comparable as a lot of these other decks. And I think, yeah, Angel Feathers itself needs a bit of work. Shadow Paladin. I think Shadow Paladin is solid. B tier deck, Luard's still a thing, but you know, all these other decks outclass it in the Grade 2 game. It used to be the king of Grade 2 gaming, right? But now these decks have kind of caught up, you know, caught up with the times, has its own Grade 2 game. Some decks have like ride-up games and absolutely demolish your face, and it's just how it is, right? And, you know, Shadow Paladin's still a deck that you need to kind of look out for. There are, you know, variants like Raging Form, still a good deck. And then the last one, Pale Moon. And this is no bias at all, and I think Pale Moon itself is an A tier deck. And I think, if anything, it could probably be an S tier deck. So why am I saying it's an S tier deck, right? If you think about it, in a vacuum, right? Highlander got hit, Gear Chronicle got hit, right? These are the two decks that got introduced the moment Pale Moon was an S tier deck, right? So when Pale Moon was played at BRO, it was the best deck. and there were a lot of decks coming up into the format, right? Shiryuki came along, and you know, we saw BRO 2022, Shiryuki came along, there were DIs, what else was there? There were a lot of like premium collection worthy decks that came along and, you know, gave Pale Moon its, you know, run for its money. So like Spike Brothers, for example, Mega Colony, these decks are good, right? But now that you take away Bermuda and Gear Chronicle, it's actually a very strong deck. And I think maybe I'm coping too much. Maybe it's not in S, maybe it's in like high A's, right? Coping too much. So I think maybe Pale Moon just kind of sits where it is at the moment. And yeah, that's that, right? Okay, so maybe Bermuda can't just stay by itself. So let's move some into S tier. So Gear Chronicle, I think, is there. I think Dark Irregulars is there. I think Dark Irregulars, a lot of people are overlooking this deck. I think this deck is freaking crazy, right? Pale Moon, I think, is there too. Aqua Force on that end as well. And I think, you know, we have a good B tier set of decks. Maybe Spike Brothers go to the top. I think Spike Brothers is legit. Genesis is also legit. Grand Blue is also legit. And then, you know, these Link Joker is a very high roll deck, a very glass cannon deck. So if, you know, it gets rolled, then oh well, you know, that's just how it is. Narukami as well. I think Narukami maybe can move forward a little bit. Maybe it goes like here, maybe, yeah, maybe here, right? And then Mega Colony kind of just sits where it is, maybe upper deck or upper tier or whatever, like here, because it really can't deal with these, but it can. So like Mega Colony can deal with Dark Irregulars, can maybe deal with GC, can maybe deal with Pale Moon, but it can't deal with like Spike Brothers, Bermuda, and Aqua Force, the likes of Genesis and Narukami either. So I think it's in a good spot. I think that's where it's supposed to be. Maybe moving some to C tier. C tier maybe like Grey Nature. We don't see that very much. Maybe Nubatama goes to C. But it's like very close, you know. The only outliers is probably like Kagera and Nova Grappler. So maybe like it goes like this, right? Kagera and Nova Grappler go into D where it needs some help. And then like all these other decks just kind of go like here, maybe something like that. I think this looks pretty good, you know. These decks here are like pretty legit. So maybe we put like golds down here. And then, yeah, maybe now Royals kind of sit in the benchmark, right? So B is like the benchmark. I think it's a pretty good way to kind of differentiate. And then, you know, these are a little bit lower than it's normal, and then D needs some help. So I think this is a pretty nice representation of what premium is like. You know, some of these decks, even though they got hit in the hands of someone that knows how to play the deck, knows how to build the deck, will do heaps of damage with these two decks. I think Dark Irregulars, you know, still super crazy. No one's playing it, and I think, you know, it's one of those decks that you still have to watch out for, still know how to play against. Pale Moon still does what it does. You have ride down players, you still have Alice Leslie. Sometimes you don't hit a damage trigger and you just get absolutely demolished. And Aqua Force is still good. And then, you know, you have the likes of all the others still contesting for that S tier slot. And, you know, not to say that any of these A tier decks can't beat the S tier decks either. Right. So yeah, I think this is a pretty good representation of how it is. This is pretty much my thoughts on premium. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think of the premium format at the moment. Is there anything that you probably change? Is there anything that you think that we should probably look out for? You know, and obviously we're probably going to be doing this in the next 3 months anyways, when, you know, history collection gets revealed, and we'll be like, oh, you know, where are these decks going to be? You know, all these decks are like super crazy with like super wacky effects, right? So this list will change once history collection comes, but this is pretty much what it looks like at the moment. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the video. If you guys like this video, pop a like, comment down below what you guys think of the format at the moment, what you guys think is going to change from this list, and I think a lot of things will change. If you haven't subscribed already, click subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.